All right, we're back, and it's COMP213, Web Interface Design. It's Week 8, Lesson 8, Part 2. And I'm just showing you my playlist. This is the playlist we talked about before. Yours will appear down here under COMP213, Web Interface Design, this little area that I've kind of reserved for you guys. All right, I'll put that up probably later on today. So just as a recap of what we talked about so far, we've talked about Visual Studio as being the editor that I'm going to be using, or IDE. The integrated development environment that I will be using for going forward for this semester. Right now, you again can choose whatever IDE you like. In Visual Studio, I've kind of created a project called COMP213 Lesson 8 Part 1, and inside that I have several folders. One of them is a CSS folder that I created, which I have a couple of files: main.css and reset.css. Again, reset.css we use to reset the browser styles back to 0, right? And then main.css is where, and again, you can call this whatever you like. I've put in some basic styling for our page so far, right? And this is where we're at right now. Okay. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about, kind of take a different tack, and talk a little bit about the stuff we're going to be covering this week, right? What I'm going to be covering is more CSS stuff today and next day, right? A little bit of page layout basics today, next day, and some links and layout and mobile stuff that work for mobile. This is coming from your book. Again, I called it Week 8 and so on. It's probably Chapter 6 or something like that. I got to look at it. From a, when I say a course outline perspective, if I look at the course outline, just to keep on track with where we're at right now. I'm just going to scroll down here. We're sitting at Week 8, right? And Week 8 shows us, we're talking about more CSS, and we're hitting chapters 6, 7, and 8 of your book. Mostly 6 and 7. We're also hitting a few items from chapter 8, as was happening there, right? And you've just finished your practical test from last week, right? So this is what we're really doing this day and next day, okay? Next week, we'll be hitting assignment number 4, right? Because that's where we're getting on to next week. And we're also going to be introducing HTML forms and HTML5 forms. That'll include chapter 10 of what we're doing. Okay? But this week, it's chapter 6, 7, and 8. So let's take a look at a little bit of that stuff. And I've kind of, in a sneaky way, I've covered a couple things already, right? Because I wanted you guys to know some of the stuff that we're doing. So let's look at this one. By the way, these PowerPoint presentations I'll also make available to you up online. They're the same PowerPoint presentations, just restyled for Centennial College that come from the publisher. But what I do is I restyle them just so they look a little bit different, a little bit more legible for me. This is how I work. Okay, so let's take a look at this a little bit. It's going to flash in a second. All right, so again, we want to talk about today. We want to talk about this box model that I was really kind of doing in a sneaky way, right? What is this box model I speak of, right? And this week we're going to be talking about, width and height, margins. We kind of talked about already in a sneaky way. I want to talk about borders and padding and all that stuff with CSS. We can do that today a little bit. We're probably going to hit some shadows and rounded corners and all that stuff. I'll try and space it out between today and next day, right? So what is this width property that we speak of, and what is this box model anyway? Well, first of all, I'm going to skip ahead a couple of things. This is our box model, right? So if you notice, before I go width and height property, when we say box model, what it really is think about a box for your container, for each of your objects, right? Or each of the things that appear on your website. So again, if this is your box, then anything that's inside your box, or the actual border for your box, is this piece right here. This is the border for your box. This is the padding that separates your content from the border, right? Or the padding is just the separator between your content and your border. And between the border and the outside of your screen is the margin. So that's really the box model in a nutshell. And when you get tested, we test you again. I'll ask you when I say what is the content. Well, the content's the text and stuff that's inside your web page. Your padding, again, between the content and the border, and so on. That's really what you need to know. This is the stuff on my PowerPoint slides are the stuff you need to know for your test if we're going to do any kind of testing. All right. Again, I'll share all that with you later on today. It'll be in a content section of your eCentennial. Again, we do everything online for me. I don't have any paper in my course. All right. Okay. So that's the box model in a nutshell. Well, we have width and height, right? So if you notice, width property says it configures the width of an element's content, an element, right? Again, can I configure the width of my div tag? Because remember, a div tag is just a container, right? That's all it is, a division or a container somehow, a section, right? So I can say width, my minimum width, here's some different properties, and my height property. Right? Be careful about that height property because that's kind of a weird thing. Let's check it out with the current code that we have. So I've got my header tag, right? And in my header tag, or in my header div, this is what this is. I have a class of header. And if I want to target my entire div tag, right? Let's give all divs a border. How do I do that? If I wanted to give all divs a border property, what do I do? What, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Yeah? Can't hear you. Kita? Okay, Mrs. K. Kita, right? Is it K or C? K, Mrs. K. This is what we're going to do, Miss K. I want you to tell me, right, here's, how do I put a border, without Googling it, how do I put a border around my div tag, every div tag? How do I do that in CSS? So I'll put a border around each of my div tags, huh? So a div is just think about this as a container tag. A div tag is a container tag that contains all the stuff that's inside of it, right? Div tags are used to break up the sections of your page and sectionalize everything, okay? So if I was going to put a border around all my div tags, what if I put a border around all my H1 tags? You know H1 tags, right? How do I do that? How would I type that in CSS? That's good. So you get the idea. So if it was going to be div, it would be div, and then opening and closing brackets, right? So remember the opening and closing brackets, right? I'm going to call this my code block, right? So these opening and closing brackets, this is my code block right here, right? And it belongs to the div tag. So anything I want to do to my div tag, when I have nothing else, just div, that means all div tags, every single div tag in my entire document. It's crazy. I don't know what I would. There'd be a reason why I want to do that. If I want to add a border property to each of my div tags, what do I put now in here inside my code block? Border. I start typing border, right? I could, but let's just put border for now. You go ahead of me. Border, right? And then the next step is here's the code hinting here that in Visual Studio. It says border, the size of your border, the type of your border, and the color of your border, right? Those are the three things I need. Tells you what you need, right? So I need the size of my border. Let's make it 1 pixel for now, right? I need the type of border. If it's dotted, is it dashed, is it solid? Let's make it dashed, right? And let's choose a color. Is it black? Is it red? Is it green? What color is it? Let's make it all of our borders are red, right? So I'm going to choose red. And Visual Studio Web Essentials pops this red color in right now, right? If I want to change my color from red to something else, right, I click on this thing and it gives me a selection of objects that I can choose, right? Again, Visual Studio Web Essentials does this beautiful thing for me. If I double click on one of these things, if I double click, right, this is one thing. I can also choose this area to give me a kind of a color picker, color chooser, if you will. And I can choose whatever color red I want that gives me the hexadecimal value right away. This is a really cool functionality that you can't find in other IDEs, right? So let's say I choose, I don't know, this color red over here. This, and if you want to be like me, I'll tell you in a second what you're going to put in. And let's say this is cool. This is my color. If you want to do my color, it's E53535. So put that inside your after the hashtag. That's the color. Now remember we talked about shortcuts, right? This doesn't have to be expressed like this, right? This is the shortcut for what border can look like. For example, you can say, I'm going to go border dash, and by the way, border, like the way I've put it in is everything, right? The entire border around the entire box, my entire div tag, which is just a container, my entire div's border, right, is 1 pixel dashed with this color, right? I can also specify the bottom. I can specify the color for this div tag. I can specify the right radius or left radius. all that kind of stuff. Let's do, if I say border dash radius, right? Now it gives me an example of what it does. It says, here's my, I can specify radius for everything else. Like for example, if I want rounded borders. For now, let's leave border radius alone, because Miss K, who says border radius, she's chomping at the bit to put that border radius in, right? I love it, right? But let's leave it alone and see what color. Let's see if all my div tags take on this kind of red border, right? So I'm going to kind of run this thing now and see what happens. So if I did it right, then all these div tags, this shows you that the divide, this, that's what you should get. These little dotted, around all my div tags, right? So if you notice, there's a div tag down here, and this big div tag with all my pictures, right? And I got a div tag up here for my hello world, as an example. All these div tags have a border now. That means every div tag. When I do my selection, the way I've done it, when I say div, it means every div, right? I want you to think about that. When you start off your CSS, I want you to start like this. Every div, and then the next one. If you add some other tag with this other thing inside of it, then do this, right? That's what it's really like, what we're really saying. Okay, I want to add my border radius. What does it do? First of all, let's change this from dashed to solid, right? So my border is solid all around, right? And I want to say my border radius, right? I want to make it like 5 pixels. So kind of rounded. Border radius. Right, so I'll save it. And then let's take a look at what I got now. I'll go back to my web page and refresh. So now I see this bit of a rounded corners here, right? From my objects, right? So border radius, right? They're all rounded. That's kind of a light rounding. Let's round it even more. Instead of 5, let's make it like 10. And see if you can really see what I'm talking about. Okay, so border radius, I'm just going to refresh here, make it 10. Okay, ooh. Okay, so rounded corners. I made a box with rounded corners, border radius. Right? Now you can change the border radius, like it showed you here in the code hinting. For example, if I go border dash radius, right? And then, if you notice, it gives me the ability to do each side. This 10 pixels is all around, just like when we did margin, right? If I affect the box, I can put in border radius top, border radius bottom, border radius left, border radius right, or I can put in shortcuts for this thing. For example, if I want my top, remember how we did it? Top, right, bottom, left. That's how it goes. Top, right, bottom, left, right? So if I go over here, and if I say my top radius, right, the top radius is 10, but my right and left radius, so how the radius goes, how many pixels it comes down from the top, and how many pixels it comes up from the right or left, right? I can make my top and my right different, so it changes the size of my circle. That's what the radius is, right? So where the middle of my circle is going to be in my top. I'll explain that to you in more detail in a second. So let's say I want to put that in. I can say, well, my top, I want to go across 10 pixels, and I want to go down 20 pixels. So it's going to be a little bit longer on the top, on the right-hand side. So if I do that, it's going to be top, right, and then let's say the bottom is the same, and the left is the same. Now, there's a pattern for you again. As you can kind of divine what that means, right? Top, right, bottom, left. And if I do that and I refresh, right, then you see it comes a little bit longer, a little bit this way, a little bit different size, right, than the other ones. I got a problem here. Look how this is cutting off my text. Oh man, this is ugly. I'm dying over here. How do I change that? There's something called padding. If I go back to my PowerPoint, right? If you notice, here's my content, and between my content and my border, there's this thing called padding, right? It's the area between the content and border. I want to give a little bit of padding so it doesn't hug my border too much. So in order for me to do that, I want to move this in like 5 pixels, maybe from the right and left, and maybe from the top and the bottom. So maybe, hey, 5 pixels from all sides, I only need one value, right? So I say padding 5 pixels, right? Let's try that out. So I'm going to go back to my CSS, and if I say that, that means I can put them in here. All div tags have padding of 5 pixels, or I could put them all in here. My body tag, everything in my body has a padding of 5 pixels. But it doesn't really make sense at this point. I think it's better to put it in for individual divs. All my divs have a padding of 5 pixels. Let's do that. So padding, right? Everything. Correct. That's why I'm suggesting we do like this, 5 pixel. So padding 5 pixels in my div tag only, right? And when I do that and go back here, I refresh, right? Now I got a bit of separation here. You know what? I don't think this is enough because see how this border radius, how it's messed us up? Because we got a border radius like 10 and 15, right? Let's take a look. See, like got a border radius of 10 and 20 actually, right? It's really huge. Maybe we need 10 padding instead of 5. And this is the stuff that happens sometimes when we start dividing our pages. 10 pixels, you know, as an example. This is cool. And you know what? I can probably do this now because I can do this because both the top and the bottom are the same. Top right, you know, top right, bottom left. Top right, bottom left. If I do that, if I go back and if I refresh, right, I get a bit of the same kind of thing going on, right? Sometimes what people do is they put no, you know, they don't want any kind of, they only want one side to have a border radius, but not the, you know, the left and the right, they want it kind of square, and just the top right, they want, you know, kind of a radius, right? Well, you can do that too, right? You can say none of these, just this, just my top right, almost like little folders, right? That look. Okay, cool. So these little bubbles. So how do I do that? So I said border radius. Instead of just these values, right? I can continue. I can say, watch, let's use my code hinting to do that. Border dash radius, and look what it says. Top left radius, top right. And I can obviously choose something like this. So border radius or border top. Here's border top right radius. See, top right radius. And if I press colon, it gives me the code hinting. Border top right radius and one value. Top right radius. Right in the top right corner, right? I want, let's say, 10 pixels, right? So if I add that instead of what it was before, and if I go back in here, and if I refresh, then we see that there's a bit of a top radius, but then look at how this squares off down here, right? And it's all square on this side, right? So that's top radius. Box model. Okay, cool, cool. We've also added padding in here. Let's make it have a width. So all of my divs, I don't want them, this is crazy why I would do this. All of my divs have a minimum width or a minimum maximum width of 300 pixels. That's going to make it weird, right? If I put width in here in my div, may not make any sense to you. If I put 300 pixels, right? If I did that, see what the effect is that going to be. Watch this. Bam, right? Kind of makes it kind of ugly, right? Because it's kind of, you got to scroll down, you know. This would be great if I was going to make a mobile page, right? Then 300 would be okay. But you know what I recommend to you highly, that instead of 300, it'd probably be around 320. Because 320 by 480 is your standard mobile size, right? So there's 320. Let's go back, refresh. There's 320, right? So a bit of roundedness here. And this is your standard mobile size. And you can scroll down and you can see that one thing is over the other. And if you're going to look at one big page, this would work nicely on mobile, right? Because 320 by 480. This is cool. I like it. But 300 is, and for every div, meh, I don't kind of like it very much, right? So we could do this 320, right? But I want to be able to float my stuff left, right? So what if I put that in? What if I made every div float left, right? And I know you guys have done floats before. Let's see what that does. If I say every div floats left and I refresh, I kind of do one of these, right? This kind of looks weird. I got my pictures over here. I got my div over here, my first content section. Then it floats to the left again. Then it floats this to the, what float left does is it piles things together in a left-right fashion. Now I got lots of room because my page is big. The bigger I make my page, the more it floats my div to the right and to the left. So if I open my page up, it goes like this big. And if I kind of put it over here, it makes it go to here, right? Floating, what the word float does is it takes the container, right, and puts it to the left of the next closest container, the next parent container, the left of, float left. What was that? Well, it's looking for each device because we put in that meta tag that says device width is equal to device width initial scale 1, right? But in this particular case, this will work if I have a really big device like a desktop device, like this big, it'll kind of float in here, right? If I have a smaller device, like a tablet, this is what it would look like. And if I have a small device, like a phone, it looks like this. It's not quite what I want right now, because it kind of floats one on top of the other, but you can see the divisions, and you see that there's a padding here between the content and the border, and between the border and the screen, that's the margin, right? And this is the border. If I want to make this border thicker, right, I can change this from 1 pixel to, let's say, 4 pixels. That's going to be really ugly, like red border. Let's take a look at that. If I refresh, it's a much thicker border that comes across. How you doing? Make sense? Let me run this thing. I know next class is coming in now. Make sense? So there's this thicker border that comes in, right? So that's what floating does, right? And again, I wanted you to see that because float left, as an example, does that. And 320 pixels. What if I made it so that the height of each of my div tags, I gotta be careful here. If I say height is like, I don't know, 320 pixels. They're each square now. What happens then? Now, for each of my div tags, so width and height properties. If I go back and I refresh, right, then I got these. And you know what else I have? I got some text that spills over from one div tag into the other, right? Because there's more text that overflows into the other div tags. And even this picture, see this picture is actually starting here, but after it gets to this 300, it kind of overflows, and that's what happens. And then here's my company over here, this other div tag, and it overflows. So that doesn't make any sense either, right? So putting in a height for an object, I mean, it's good for some of them, like this one, if you want a minimum height for a particular object. Like if you want all of them to have a minimum height of blah, blah, right? So they all look like the same. But you can also have a maximum height at a certain point, right? An example of that would be, I've used height, right? But I can actually put in minimum height. So if I say min dash height, and if I say that's 320 pixels, that's different than putting a height max. And if I show you what that looks like, it looks like this. There's this thing, right, nicely. Here's this one that holds all the pictures. And then here's this one. Oh man, this is like huge for my footer. It's massive, right? But as you can see, this one, and that one have a minimum height of 320 pixels. Okay, so that's all for today. Let's meet again next day. We're going to talk more about this box model idea that we're going to get into. And I'll get you guys up to speed, even if we're a little bit behind for next week. My scope is for this week to get you guys in a new tool, Visual Studio 2013 with Web Essentials, right? Get you going on CSS on the box model, right? And then by next week we'll have assignment number 4, right? I believe is what we're giving you next week. So that's it for me.